Picture this. It's 1964, and while Ford and Chrysler are throwing millions at their factory drag racing programs, a mechanic named Tommy Ivo is bolting two Buick nailhead V8s into a chassis he welded up in his garage. The automotive establishment called him crazy. The NHRA said it would never work. 3 months later, he's running quarter miles faster than cars with twice his budget, and every major team in the country is scrambling to copy his design. This is the story of how one self-taught mechanic from Burbank changed drag racing forever, nearly died doing it, and walked away from the sport at the height of his success. To understand what Tommy Ivo achieved, you need to understand what drag racing was like in 1964. The sport was dominated by single-engine rail jobs, stripped-down chassis with one massive engine up front, skinny tires, and drivers sitting directly over the rear axle. The formula was simple: biggest engine, most nitromethane, pray it doesn't explode before the finish line. The top fuel dragsters of the era were running Chrysler's 392 or 426 Hemi engines, punched out to 500 cubic inches, force-fed with GMC superchargers the size of beer kegs. On a good pass, they'd make 1 to 800 horsepower. On a bad pass, they'd scatter engine parts across 3 counties. Don Big Daddy Garlits was the king, running 7.78 seconds at 201 miles per hour. That was the benchmark. That was what everyone was chasing. But here's where it gets interesting. While the big teams were focused on making one engine bigger and angrier, Tommy Ivo was thinking differently. Born in 1936, Ivo wasn't your typical gearhead. He'd started as a child actor in the 1940s, appearing in over 200 films and TV shows, made good money, invested it wisely, and by his 20s had enough cash to pursue his real passion, going fast. Ivo had been racing since 1955, starting with a 1942 Chrysler sedan that he'd stripped and modified. By 1960, he'd built his first Dragster, a conventional single-engine rail that ran respectable times but never quite caught the big dogs. He'd watched Garlits and the factory teams with their unlimited budgets and realized he'd never beat them playing their game. He needed something radical, something nobody had tried. The inspiration came from an unlikely source: twin-engine Allison aircraft from World War II. Ivo had been reading about the P-38 Lightning fighter, how Lockheed had solved the problem of getting more power without the weight penalty of a massive radial engine by using 2 smaller inline engines. The synchronization was handled mechanically, through precision gearing. If it worked at 30,000 feet and 400 miles per hour, why not on a drag strip? In late 1963, Ivo started sketching. The chassis would need to be completely different from anything in drag racing. Instead of one engine up front, he'd mount 2 Buick 401 nailhead V8s, side by side, angled slightly inward so their crankshafts would meet at a common coupler. Behind that, a single clutch, single transmission, single drive shaft. The theory was sound. The execution would be a nightmare. First problem: nobody made a coupler that could handle 2 engines worth of power. Ivo had to design and machine his own from a solid billet of 4340 chromoly steel. It took 17 attempts before he had one that didn't crack under testing. Each attempt cost him $400 in materials and machine time, about $4,000 in today's money. Second problem: synchronization. The engines had to fire in perfect sequence, or they'd fight each other and tear the coupler apart. Ivo spent 3 months developing a dual magneto system with mechanically linked advance mechanisms. One magneto controlled both engines, with precisely machined cam lobes ensuring the firing order alternated between engines. Bank 1 on the left engine, bank 1 on the right engine, bank 2 on the left, bank 2 on the right, 800 times per second at full throttle. The chassis itself was revolutionary. Ivo used 4130 chromoly tubing, TIG welded, still exotic technology in 1964. The frame rails were 7 feet longer than standard to accommodate both engines. The total wheelbase stretched to 175 inches. For comparison, Garlett's record-setting car had a 140-inch wheelbase. This thing was massive. But the real genius was in the details. Ivo positioned the engines so their combined center of gravity was exactly where a single engine would sit. He ran individual exhaust headers that curved upward and outward, creating what he called zoomy headers, 8 pipes per side, shooting flames skyward. The visual was incredible, but it also served a purpose. The upward angled exhaust provided a tiny bit of downforce, helping plant the rear tires. The fuel system was equally complex. 2 mechanical fuel injection systems, one per engine, fed by a single 5-gallon moon tank. But here's the clever bit. Ivo plumbed them with a balance tube between the fuel rails. If one engine started running lean, it would automatically pull fuel from the other engine's system. Self-balancing fuel delivery, purely mechanical, no electronics. For the blower setup, Ivo chose GMC 671 superchargers, one per engine, underdriven to about 15% overdrive. Conservative by top fuel standards, but remember, he had 2 of them. Each blower was moving about 900 cubic feet of air per minute. The combined airflow was staggering. The engines were built identically, 401 cubic inches bored, 0.060, over to 415 cubes, 12.1 compression, Isky roller camshafts with 0.650 lift, and 320 degrees duration. Relatively mild for drag racing, but again, there were 2 of them. Initial dyno testing was promising. Each engine made 625 horsepower on gasoline. Switched to nitromethane, and they jumped to 900 each. But that was on the dyno, with perfect conditions and no load. The real test would come at the track. March 14, 1964, Lions Drag Strip, Long Beach, California. Ivo rolled out what he called the Twin Buick for its first public test. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. This thing was longer than a Cadillac with 16 exhaust pipes, shooting flames, 6 feet in the air. It sounded wrong, too. Instead of the thunderous bark of a single engine, it had this eerie, smooth howl, like 2 engines singing in harmony. First pass, cautious throttle, just getting a feel. The car launched straight, no drama, 60-foot time of 1.1 seconds, respectable, but not spectacular. But then something magical happened. While single-engine cars would start to nose over as they shifted gears, the Twin Buick just kept pulling, and pulling, and pulling. It crossed the finish line at 8:42 seconds, 189 miles per hour. Not a record, but remember, this was the first full pass on a completely experimental setup. Garlett's record car had taken 3 years of development to run 7.28. Ivo was already in the ballpark on day 1. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Second pass, Ivo decided to lean on it harder. More nitro in the mix, more aggressive launch. The car left like it was shot from a cannon. Then, at about 300 feet, the right engine backfired. The explosion was so violent, it lifted the body off the chassis, ripped the supercharger off its mounts, and sent shrapnel through the firewall. Ivo, sitting just 18 inches behind the engines with only a thin aluminum panel for protection, caught a piece of magnesium blower case in the shoulder. The car veered hard right, Ivo fighting to keep it off the wall while bleeding profusely. He managed to kill both engines and coast to a stop. Track safety crews found him conscious but in shock, his fire suit soaked in blood. The wound required 47 stitches and 2 pints of blood. He was back in the garage 5 days later. This is where most people would have quit. Ivo rebuilt, but he didn't just rebuild, he re-engineered. He added a scatter shield between the engines and driver, reinforced the blower mounting plates, installed pressure relief valves in the intake manifolds, and here's the brilliant part. He added what he called sympathetic throttle linkage. If one engine started to over-rev, indicating a blower belt failure, or catastrophic damage, it would automatically close the throttle on both engines. 6 weeks after nearly dying, Ivo was back at Lyons. This time, the car was an animal. First pass, 8:19 at 198. Second pass, 7:96 at 204. He'd just become the first independent racer to break into the sevens and the first twin-engine car to exceed 200 miles per hour. Word spread fast. Within a month, TV Tommy Ivo and his twin-engine monster were the biggest draw in drag racing. Track owners were offering him $2,000 just to show up, about $20,000 today. He was matching them against Garlitz, Chris Karamessind, Don Prudhomme. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost. But the crowd loved the spectacle. 16 pipes breathing fire, that otherworldly sound, and this wild-haired former child actor driving the thing like he'd stolen it. The technical evolution was rapid. Ivo was constantly experimenting. He tried different coupling designs, eventually settling on a splined unit that could handle 2,000 horsepower without flinching. He played with ignition timing, discovering that retarding the right engine by 2 degrees actually made both engines run smoother, something about harmonic cancellation that he never fully understood but worked. By September 1964, the twin Buick was running 7.73 at 207 miles per hour, faster than Garlitz's single-engine record. But more importantly, it was doing it consistently. Single-engine top fuelers of the era had about a 50% completion rate. Half the time they'd blow up, burn down, or crash. Ivo's twin was finishing 80% of its passes. The redundancy of 2 engines meant if one started to fail, you still had power to control the car and shut down safely. Other racers took notice. Jack Christman built a twin Chrysler car. The Arfons brothers created a twin Allison Monster using actual aircraft engines. Suddenly, everyone wanted to run twins. The NHRA didn't know what to do. They tried to ban them, claiming they were too dangerous. Ivo showed up to the rules meeting with statistics. His twin had a better safety record than conventional cars. The ban was rescinded. But the real innovation wasn't just bolting 2 engines together, it was the systematic approach to the engineering. Ivo kept detailed logs of every pass, spark plug readings, exhaust temperatures, clutch wear, tire pressures. He was doing data acquisition with pencil and paper, spotting trends that helped him predict failures before they happened. He discovered that the left engine always ran slightly hotter than the right. Turns out, the driver's body was blocking airflow to the left side. Solution? He cut cooling vents in the body and added a small air scoop. Temperature dropped 15 degrees. Problem solved. The clutch was another revelation. Running 2 engines through a single clutch should have been a disaster. All that rotating mass, all that power hitting at once. But Ivo figured out that by using a smaller diameter clutch with more aggressive friction material, he could actually get better launches than single-engine cars. The twin engines provided smoother power delivery. Instead of one massive hit, it was 2 slightly smaller hits milliseconds apart. The tires hooked better. By 1965, the twin Buick was a legitimate championship contender. Ivo won the Bakersfield March Meet, the sport's biggest event, beating Garlitz in the final. The winning pass, 762 at 209 miles per hour. He collected $5,000 and a trophy taller than he was, but racing twins wasn't without its problems. Maintenance was doubled. Everything wore out faster. A typical top fuel engine needed a rebuild every 10 passes. Ivo was rebuilding 20 engines every 10 passes. He had a crew of 6 just to keep up. His annual engine budget was $75,000, about $750,000 today. Synchronization was never perfect either. On cold mornings, the engines would fight each other until they warmed up. Ivo described it as trying to get 2 angry brothers to work together. He'd have to nurse them through warm-up, carefully balancing the throttles until they settled into rhythm. There were more explosions too. May 1965, Pomona Raceway. Both engines detonated simultaneously at the finish line. The force was so violent it split the chassis rails. Ivo was knocked unconscious, came to hanging upside down, still strapped in, with the car on fire. Track workers cut him out with 30 seconds to spare, second-degree burns on his hands and arms. He was racing again 3 weeks later with bandages under his gloves. The psychological toll was real. Ivo later admitted he'd developed a twitch. Every time he staged the car, his left eye would involuntarily close, his body anticipating another explosion. He started seeing a sports psychologist, one of the first racers to do so. The sessions helped, but the fear never completely went away. Despite the success, or perhaps because of it, the twin-engine era was surprisingly short. By late 1965, the single-engine guys had caught up, improved superchargers, better fuel mixtures, stronger bottom ends. Garlett's new car was running 750s with one engine. The complexity of twins wasn't worth it anymore. Ivo saw the writing on the wall. In January 1966, he made a shocking announcement. He was retiring from fuel racing. At just 29 years old, at the peak of his success, he walked away. His reason? "I've proven what I wanted to prove. Time to try something else." The twin Buick's last competitive pass was at Orange County International Raceway, January 16, 1966. It ran 7.58 at 211 miles per hour, still competitive with anything in the country. Ivo parked it in his garage, covered it with a tarp, and didn't touch it for 20 years. But the influence lived on. The coupling design Ivo pioneered was adapted for turbine cars in the 1970s. His data logging methodology became standard practice. The safety innovations, scatter shields, pressure relief valves, sympathetic throttle linkage saved countless lives. The NHRA adopted most of them as mandatory equipment by 1968. The twin-engine concept itself never completely died. Land speed racers picked it up. The Summers brothers ran twin engines at Bonneville, Mickey Thompson's Challenger. I used 4 engines. The synchronization principles Ivo developed were the foundation for all of them. In the 1980s, tractor pullers discovered Ivo's old technical articles. They started building twin, triple, even quad-engine pullers using his coupling designs. Today, the top pullers run as many as 5 turbocharged engines, all synchronized using variations of Ivo's mechanical linkage system. Ivo himself returned to the car in 1986. He'd kept everything, the spare engines, the coupling units, even the original time slips. He restored it to exactly how it ran in 1965, down to the same spark plugs he'd used. It's now in the NHRA museum, still capable of running if anyone was brave enough to fire it up. Looking back, what Ivo achieved was remarkable. Not just the technical feat of making 2 engines work as one, but doing it as an independent, self-funded racer going up against factory teams with unlimited budgets. He spent about $50,000 building and racing the twin Buick, roughly $500,000 today. Chrysler was spending that much every month on their racing program. The real genius wasn't the horsepower or the elapsed times. It was the systematic approach to innovation. Ivo didn't just bolt 2 engines together and hope for the best. He engineered solutions to problems nobody had encountered before. He turned catastrophic failures into learning opportunities. He kept pushing when conventional wisdom said to stop. There's something deeply American about the whole story. A self-made man with a crazy idea, working in his garage, taking on the establishment, and winning. The fact that he walked away at his peak, on his own terms, just adds to the legend. He didn't need to prove he was the best forever. He just needed to prove it was possible. Today's drag racing is a different world. Computers control everything. Teams have engineers with PhDs. A competitive top fuel operation costs $3 million per year. The cars are safer, faster, more reliable. They run 3.6 seconds at 330 miles per hour. Incredible machines. But they all run one engine. Because after Tommy Ivo proved twins could work, he also proved they didn't need to. The single-engine formula, pushed to its absolute limit, was enough. The twin-engine era lasted just 18 months, but it pushed the entire sport forward by years. It forced everyone to think differently, to question assumptions, to innovate or be left behind. That's the real legacy of the twin Buick. Not the records, not the victories, but the mindset. The willingness to try something everyone said was impossible. The persistence to keep going after literally being blown up. The wisdom to walk away when the job was done. Ivo is 88 years old now, still sharp, still building cars in his Burbank garage. Not dragsters anymore, he's into street rods now. But occasionally, at car shows, someone will recognize him. "You're the twin-engine guy," they'll say, and his eyes will light up, and he'll spend the next hour explaining exactly how he made two engines sing in perfect harmony, if only for a brief, brilliant moment in drag racing history. What's the craziest engine combination you've ever seen attempted? Drop a comment below. And if you want more stories about the mavericks who changed motorsports forever, make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting started uncovering these forgotten legends.